Hello everybody. I would really like to title this particular video, Ivan the Terrible. So the other day, well, I've been fighting a cold. I don't know if anyone has noticed that or not, but I have definitely had a runny nose anyway. I don't think anything serious. But because of having this particular cold, I have been watching a lot of documentaries because I can't really do much else anyway. And one of the documentaries that I watched was about Ivan the Terrible. And I really was infatuated with this story, especially in light of, I don't know if it was a year ago or if it was 6 months ago or something along those lines. I was watching a sort of overall history of Russia and the rulers in Russia. And I really felt a deep fascination with the relationship that Russia has with its rulers. And I came to the conclusion 6 months ago, or whenever I watched the original documentary of the history of Russia, that one of the most dangerous professions in the world was actually to try to rule Russia. But anyway, this was a specific story about Ivan the Terrible, and that story was so interesting to me. Basically, his parents died when he was very young, and apparently there was some kind of a curse spoken over him by some Orthodox priests. His father apparently married somebody who was much younger than he was, and he sort of dissed his first wife, and the Orthodox priest basically cursed the son that they had to being a terrible ruler. But the father basically ignored the priest, and he went ahead and he took this very young lady, and they ended up having a little baby boy that ended up being Ivan the Terrible. Now, he grew up without parents. His father died. I'm not sure I remember exactly what happened to his mom, but the people who took care of him basically enslaved him and were exceptionally cruel to him. It is very hard to know exactly how much is fable and how much is truth, but there was even talk about him basically having to witness exceptional, horrible cruelty done to people and different forms of torture. So finally, when he grew up old enough, he did some political maneuvers that were so brutal that he was basically able to stomp down the people who had him underneath control, and he basically said, hey, I will forgive. All of you have done treacherously against me, but I will forgive all of you if you give me this guy's head on a stake, basically. And he was able to basically grab a hold of his throne and his empire from this particular maneuver that was gutsy and bold, and there was a real touch of cruelty involved in it. So pretty much as soon as he grabbed a hold of his throne, he decided to go on a hunt for a wife, and he apparently found a really good Russian Orthodox woman who was incredibly special. She seemed to be very mild and gentle and forgiving, and she had such a wise way of dealing with Ivan the Terrible that he was a lot less terrible. There were still some things that he did, and he was still kind of a harsh ruler. But his first wife seemed to bring out the very best in him and was just a really amazing woman. And they actually seemed to have a tremendous lovely, passionate romance together. But as time went on, his enemies decided to try to hurt Ivan, and they really couldn't reach him, so apparently they poisoned his wife. Now, back then it was very difficult to prove that she had been poisoned, so there wasn't a lot of ways of really proving that she was poisoned, but later her body was tested, and there were extremely high levels of mercury, so she was indeed poisoned. But Ivan the Terrible, he knew that somebody had done this to him, and somebody had murdered his wife, And so he responded by becoming all the more cruel. He did find some other wives. They did not have the same good way about them as his first wife, and they almost seemed to bring out more and more cruelty and more unforgiveness in Ivan the Terrible. And so there was this really strange relationship where Ivan hurt his people and his people hurt him back. And back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. And finally, Ivan the Terrible ended up wiping out his whole family line through his cruelty and through his terribleness. And he died. And, there was a tremendous, time of uncertainty in Russia. But eventually, it was very interesting because the Romanovs, which was the ruling class in Russia for many, many years until they came to an extremely unfortunate end, they themselves actually were stemming from his first wife's family tree. So Ivan the Terrible wiped himself out, but somehow his first wife's family ended up being the rulers of Russia for many, many years until the communist government basically took them out and dealt with them with real viciousness and real cruelty. So this relationship with Russia and its rulers is really, really interesting to me. I really love Russia. I think Russians are very warm, generous, kind people. But I do think that there is kind of a strange cruel streak that can run through, and I'm not sure exactly how I can understand how it works. And, I'm not that familiar with Russia. I know a few Russians who are just the most exceptional people you could ever imagine. But you definitely see this very strange relationship between almost kind of a combative cruelty that Russia has, the rulers have with its people and the people have with its rulers. And I really, really think that this is so very important, why it's not just the rulers that have to show forgiveness and compassion to the people, but the people must also show forgiveness and compassion, and not just the kings and not just the rulers, but also the priests, because the priests throughout Ivan the Terrible's life, even before he was born, were cursing him and were basically condemning him to being terrible. And you see that even when he was going through some of the things that he was going through, the priests were quite regularly condemning him and cursing him. And then you see the people who were poisoning his wife, and who was very good and very wonderful. And you see Ivan going and torturing his people because he was angry with them for basically hurting him. And you see this real combative relationship. And it's really important for priests to bless and to try to avoid cursing. Apparently, this was a real thing, and Ivan the Terrible almost kind of proves that he wasn't really so terrible, because his relationship with his wife was quite wonderful. They loved each other, they were passionate and kind towards each other. So it wasn't just that Ivan the Terrible was just this person who was exceptionally cruel and enjoyed cruelty, but that there was a combative relationship between him and the people and the priests that just kept on going until they burnt each other out, basically. So I think that the relationship he had with his first wife was real proof that Ivan the Terrible was actually quite at heart a wonderful person given the right circumstances. And I think that it really can show too that when you have a priest or a priesthood of priests, and you have people who are cruel and a ruler who's cruel, and they're all just beating each other up on a continuous basis, it only drives war and pain and cruelty and the whole lump. So that is my thoughts on Ivan the Terrible.